Morning, everyone. So today we'll be reading from 1 Samuel 17, and we'll be jumping around a bit with the verses. So we'll start from verse 8. So Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why did you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 eldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And then we'll go to verse 20. This is on page 288, by the way. So, verse 20, early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out, as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage, and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." David asked the man standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And then we go to verse 31. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight for him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Verse 45. David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." Verse 47. All those gathered here will know it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and took out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground.
Thank you so much, Dominique. I gave her about a minute's warning before the service, and that verse was all over the place. I will tell you that in in the preaching notes, it just said the whole of chapter 17, so I am doing you a favor, guys, that we cut that down, but I'm sorry it jumped all over the place. Hello, everybody. Hello. I'm Amy, and I'm going to be continuing our series this morning, and it is titled, This Is Us. And we're on week 4 of exploring how what each of our values are as a church. And I know not everyone is here every week, or maybe some people are sometimes out on teams serving in kids, or also 4 weeks is a long time to remember something. So we're going to start with a quick summary. So week 1, James looked at also, I might, do a bit of pointing, see if anyone can remember what those ones are. It's not a test, but we're just going to see how we go. So week 1, James looked at how we think church should feel like, anything? Church? Family. Thanks, Dan. You have got the slides, so that is cheating, but we'll go with it. How church should feel like family, where we are accepted for who we are. So then week 2, we had Pete, who explored how we believe that life with Jesus is worth seeking after, and how we want to be expectant of encounter with the Holy Spirit. So encounter is our second value. And then last week, James shared our desire to be a church who don't believe in going it alone, that we want to strive for unity. Absolutely nailed that one, guys. Great. So this week, I'm going to be talking through how we want to be a people that take big steps of faith. We don't want to play it safe, and we are going to explore, on the screen there, risk. And we've got a bit of wording alongside each of our values. You can see this on our website if you want to look at them for any of the others. But the wording is, we want to be a people that take big steps of faith and not play it safe, as we have a big God who's with us and guides us even when we get it wrong. We'd rather be a people that had a go than do nothing. And then just to give you a quick spoiler for next week, Emma is going to be taking us through our 5th value, which is that we take Jesus seriously, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. We want to have a laugh often, and enjoy the journey. So we're going to be exploring our value of fun next week, and there they all are. So, whilst you probably look at all the other values and go, yeah, that seems pretty reasonable. We want to be a family. We want to be unified. We want to encounter the Holy Spirit. We want to have fun. We want to have this risk one, it's a little bit of a curveball. It's maybe the one that you go, oh, wait a second. We want to have a culture of risk. We want to value risk as a church family. And you might be thinking of running for the door, and that's not for you at all. But before we do, I'd love to just delve a little bit deeper in that. So I'm going to start with a story. And it's about a time that I took a bit of a risk. And I would love to tell you a story about how I jumped out of a plane, or I went base jumping, or I risked it all at a casino and, learned a really valuable lesson about risk. But as I was thinking about risk, I realized I'm actually quite boring, and I'm quite risk averse, and it's not really for me, and I don't have any stories like that. So the most risky thing is the one I'm going to tell you now, that I can think of anyway. And there was a time that my twin sister and I were turning 30, and it was ahead of our birthday. And when it's someone that you know so well, there's quite a lot of pressure to get a big gift for a big milestone perfect, right? So I was feeling the pressure, and I was sort of reflecting on how we could commemorate this big milestone. We'd spent 30 years plus 9 months together, and I think others might think maybe go for an afternoon tea. Maybe get a lovely photo book. I think I might have done that as well, to be fair. Maybe get a personalised photo frame, something lovely like that. What I did was I booked us in with deposit paid for matching tattoos. This is what I went with. I will say, okay, yeah, there we go. It went ahead. So this is where neither of us have got any tattoos. This is not something we'd ever talked about. This is not something that had come up in conversation. It's not something that we have a history of at all. But I just had this inkling that she might like it and that she'd go for it. Inkling. Didn't even get that myself. I'd love to say that was intentional. And so I took a risk, I paid a deposit, and I booked us in and hoped for the best. And thankfully, we got to the big 30th birthday, and she was thrilled. She loved it. We spent hours planning what we were going to get, and after a few false starts due to pregnancies getting in the way, we eventually, in January this year, had our matching tattoos done, and this is proof that it actually happened. So in this sort of relatively secure and well-informed decision-making life that I have, very type A, this plan was risky for me. There was sort of this risk of money with a lost deposit. There was a risk of broken trust if she was like, "Who? Do you know me at all? What on earth were you thinking?" And there was maybe a risk of looking a little bit silly that I actually didn't know my twin sister of 30 years as well as I thought I did. But after 30 years of investing time and energy and love and commitment into this relationship, that inkling was based on something a little bit deeper. It was almost this unconscious knowledge that really she'd love something like this. So keep that in mind. And before we circle back to the Bible passage for today, I would love to just have a look at a few different types of risk. What might be in our minds when we hear this word risk? And so the first one is probably the one that a lot of us think of first of all. It's probably the one where if you think this is the one we value as a church, if this is the one we really want to create a culture of, you'd be quite reasonable in wanting to run for the door. And this is reckless risk. If we can have the next slide. And reckless risk is really we have no idea how it might go. It's based on a complete lack of knowledge. It's often self-destructive. Sometimes it comes with risk to others as much as it does ourselves. So this is reckless risk. And spoiler, this is not the one I'm saying we want to be valuing and have a culture of as a church. The next one is probably a little bit closer to that tattoo risk, calculated risk. You've maybe made some preparations. You've assessed the situation in front of you. You've looked at what you do know. You've looked at the knowledge that you have. And you've calculated the risk. And often you've sort of figured that the chances of something going wrong are not too high. But the cost, if it does go wrong, could be great. I wonder whether it's sort of the jumping from a plane is in that one as well. The risks, you've calculated it, it's not too high. But if it goes wrong, it's going pretty wrong. This is calculated risk. And then finally, the one that we're actually wanting to value and talk about today is godly risk. And it's kind of somewhere between the two, I would say. So we don't actually know how it might go. We can't always know the potential costs or fully prepare ourselves. But ultimately, we can calculate that the thing that we can rely on is God. And I can tell you now, we can have complete confidence in him. So, if we go to the next slide, I say that we can have confidence in God. But what does this sort of actually mean or look like? And we can definitely, I will say, have confidence that God cares for us deeply. That he pours out his love at every opportunity. And we can have confidence that he wants to see his kingdom breaking through here on earth. And we can also have confidence that we don't actually have to do anything to earn his love and affection. They're the things we can have confidence in. But what does that mean for the sort of big situations that we see in life? What about where there is a risk of injury or death or war? Or these seemingly impossible life circumstances that are put in front of us. And I think we can look at the world around us in Chorlton and in this city, and we can see quite clearly that some suffer and some live extravagantly. And it's not always those with the biggest faith that are the ones, in fact, it's rarely those with the biggest faith, that are the ones living comfortably, or most comfortably. So if we take godly risks, knowing that we can rely on God, that we can have confidence in him, will that always lead to our safety and our comfort? And what is it that we are supposed to take these godly risks with? Is it our future, our finances, our health, our very carefully made plans? Well, our Bible reading today was part of the story of David and Goliath, and you might be very familiar with it. If not the sort of Bible story, it's sort of referenced in all kinds of popular culture, isn't it? And the slightly wider context of this story is that Israel had been established by God, but then they became restless. And they decided that they wanted a king instead. They decided, actually, God wasn't enough. We want a king to lead us into battle. So Saul was appointed as their king, and after doing a pretty rubbish job, David was anointed as future king, but it wasn't well known at this point. And so Israel, they'd asked for a king to lead them, and they were faced with this Philistine army and this mighty giant Goliath. And absolutely no one stepped up. No one stepped up to the call, who will face me, including their chosen king, Saul. And I think probably the Philistines were feeling pretty confident. They had a giant on their side, and logic says no one's beating this guy. They probably wouldn't even, have to get their armor dirty. This was a done deal here. And so into this enters David. And he was sent to the front line as a shepherd just to give his brother some sandwiches. They needed some food. And so what we know of David, and this is sort of looking at the wider Bible picture, we hear that David, though he was a deeply flawed man in many ways, he had this intimate and constant relationship and closeness with God. This is what we hear time and again, that he's offered the opportunity to grab power by his own means, but instead he remains focused on God. He trusts in his plans, and he waits for God opportunities. And so we see David arrive, and he sees the Israelites trembling in fear. Their king is hiding behind them, and he sees the Philistines bold in their confidence in the mighty Goliath. He sees the Philistines and Goliath mocking the God that he knows and he loves. And so David showed up, and he didn't focus on this fear, to be honest, the logic of the situation, but instead he says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Where others were focused on the situation and their fear, he was focused on his God. And then again, when he tells Saul that he'll go and fight Goliath, Saul's reaction is like, no, you're too young. You're too young, you're not a warrior, you're not cut out for this. And then when David persists, he offers him this ill-fitting armor. And instead, David says, the Lord will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. And he says, the battle is the Lord's. So where Saul is fixated on this fear and this worldly logic, and he sort of offers the best he's got, this ill-fitting armor that's not in any way made for David, as a solution, David has his eyes fixed firmly on his God that he knows. And so we see the conclusion of this story. David goes out, and he has no armor. He just has his trusty slingshot that he's used before with bears and lions, and he has 5 smooth stones. And he brought down this mighty giant like it was nothing, to be honest. So my question is, where did this incredible confidence come from? How was he able to take this huge, godly risk. It was a huge risk. It was a risk to his life. So how could he do that? What can we learn from him? So 2 things that I see on the next slide are he knew God and he knew himself. If I can have the next slide, Dan, is that all right? So how did he take this risk? He knew God and he knew himself. And I would suggest that on the next slide, we have actually got a third tool in our arsenal. We can know that through Jesus, the battle is already won. We're even better prepared than David was. And what wasn't in the how did he take this big risk, isn't brute strength. He knew he'd be able to do it by brute strength. Because actually, you know what? And this isn't necessarily easy to hear or say, we can't defeat Goliath. We might give it a good go. We might sort of try and get close enough and give him a good kick in the shins, see if that makes a difference. And the world might tell us that we can if we graft and we work hard enough and we kind of maybe change our personality a bit, make it better. And we have the most expensive tools and things available to us. And if we just sort of think really good positive thoughts. But actually we just cannot do it ourselves. But there's really good news. The defeat of our Goliath has already been done by God through Jesus. And godly risk is heading into a battlefield where the battle is won. But I will say that doesn't mean that it's not a scary place to step onto, that battlefield. There are often still really big things fighting for our attention, telling us that they still stand a chance, pacing back and forth, mocking us often, and telling us that they are where we need to put our attention. It might be that grafting hustle culture saying, no, look here, I'm where you need to be focusing. It might be false security in money. It might be this addiction to sex and power. It might be striving for comfort and security above all things. These are the things that are pacing up and down the battlefield saying, no, it's not won. Don't worry about that. Look at me because I'm still here. But Jesus tells us to fix our eyes on him and to orient our steps across the battlefield towards him. And then the joy comes when we see instead, not the battlefield or the distractions or all those big things fighting for our attention, but actually we fix our eyes on Jesus and we see God's kingdom breaking through here on earth as it is in heaven. And this is just to paint a picture of what that might be. This is God's kingdom where instead of hustle culture, we can operate in God's healthy design of work and rest. And where instead of putting our security in money, we can rest assured that the maker of the whole universe is our provider and that he'll give us all he needs, all we need. And where addiction to sex and power are replaced by a joy in God's perfect design for human sexuality and a freedom in knowing that all power is held by one who loves us unconditionally. And where this striving for worldly comfort and security, which never quite hit the spot, are replaced by this spirit depth comfort as we lean on Jesus. So I'd love to make this a little less theoretical and think about what this actually means for us. What do we mean when we say we want to be a church who take big steps of faith and not play it safe? We're a church whose eyes are fixated on Jesus. what that means is we want to orient ourselves to him and allow him to show us who we were created to be. Remember, there were two things. There were knowing God and there was knowing ourselves. We need to fix our eyes on God so that we know who he created us to be. And then we'll see opportunities to take part in God's kingdom breaking through here. And also, we want to be a church that recognize that stepping into those opportunities doesn't always lead to worldly safety and comfort and wealth and power, but it will lead us into seeing pockets of God's freedom and rest and peace and comfort and joy for us and for those around us. This is what we're seeing breaking through when we step into those opportunities. And we're going to know that we're oriented to something bigger than ourselves. And not just that, we're oriented to a battle that's already won. We don't need to focus on the little skirmishes still happening. So what does and has this looked like for us as a church in practical sort of ways on the ground? Well, for those who don't know, I am the treasurer here at St. Werburgh's, which I hear the irony of the treasurer doing the talk on risk. This is a weird choice, but we're going with it. But actually, what this means in practice with our finances has been, we planted this church 4 years ago, and we knew that we were on this 5-year deadline with steadily reducing funding. But also we had this big vision to see people, communities, and churches come alive in Jesus' name. And so what that's meant has been fixing our eyes on God, dedicating ourselves to prayer, keeping in really, really close step with him. And it's also meant knowing ourselves, knowing who we're called to be as a church. We can't do all things, be all things. Who is God calling us to be as a church? What God-given gifts do we have within our church? Where is God directing us? And then ultimately, it's been knowing that God is in control of the mission, the finances of this church. So as long as we're sort of making financial decisions based on those first two things, knowing God and knowing who he's called us to be, we can step out into this godly risk. And so far, miraculously, sometimes in spite of the occasional wobble from me, which God gently guides me through very kindly, provision has always come. It's often the final ding, the final hour is when it comes, but it always comes. It's also meant stepping out into committing to plant another church, knowing that that is what God has called us to do. Even when we feel not even slightly ready and kind of feeling like we only just started this thing ourselves. It's meant as a church stepping out boldly into new areas that God is calling us to minister in and trusting that he's going to make a way. And obviously, just a caveat here, we're all human. We're a church made up of humans, and we get it wrong. Sometimes, often, to be honest. And sometimes something doesn't work, or we have to cancel plans, or we feel vulnerable. That happens often, and we look a bit silly. But actually, we want to be a church that continues to take those really big steps anyway, because we know that it's through doing that we'll be fixing our eyes on Jesus, and we'll be seeing those pockets of God's freedom and God's kingdom breaking through. And obviously, as a family, we started with the fact that we're a family. That's our value. And as a family, we have grace for each other as we get it wrong, because we know that each one of us will do that at different times. So that's us as a whole church. And obviously, each one of you is included in that. That is not just the staff team or the senior leadership that are making those calls as we put that value high on who we are as a church. That's each one of us in this room. But actually, we're only going to have this culture as a church if each one of us are living this in our scattered daily lives. So I'd love to ask, just as we sort of finish, what might this look like for you each individually today? Is it cancelling a routine, sacrificing sleep or scrolling time to fix your eyes on Jesus? That has to be the starting point. Is it using the opportunities in front of you to share the life Jesus offers with someone who doesn't know it yet? And that's a risk. You don't know how that's going to be received. You can kind of take a punt. You can know that person, but there's a chance you might look silly or it be badly received. But Jesus has placed these people in your life, and he's also placed you, a gift in you, to share his love. Is it sacrificially budgeting in some extra presents this year to share with Emmeline's Pantry for those who aren't able to do that themselves, so that we can see that pocket of Jesus' generosity breaking through in this place? Is it, as that next big life decision is coming up, committing perhaps before you even know what it is, which is even scarier, that you're going to prayerfully follow the call of Jesus in that life decision rather than your own leanings? Is it seeking support for any areas where you might be experiencing addiction and committing to walk that road to freedom with Jesus? Or maybe it's actually the scariest one of all of them. It's waking up each and every day and saying, Jesus, today is yours. Show me where you want to use me to see your kingdom come. And then I will say, do not be surprised when he follows through on that request. And be ready to listen, fixing your eyes on him, knowing who he's called you to be, to step out into those godly risks where we know we can have complete confidence in his kingdom breaking through in this place and in our lives and the lives of each one of those people that we're meeting and spending our lives with. So I'd love to, that's me done, but I'd love to invite the band up and actually lead us in a bit of ministry time after this. I feel like it doesn't feel quite right to talk about godly risk and then just not really do anything about it. So can I invite you to stand with me?